Hello and welcome to the Flute Space, a platform created to share interesting stories of our life as musicians and artists. You can find the podcast in your favorite platforms, and if you want to know more about us or news and guests, follow us on Instagram. Also, if you want to help us developing this project further, you can look for the Flute Space on Buy Me a Coffee. Enjoy the episode!
So today's a very exciting day. We took a Flixbus. We came to super sunny Amsterdam to meet Emily Beynon.
Hello.
Hi,
hello.
welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You just came from a rehearsal with Concertgebouw.
I did, yes.
Exciting. So we want to start talking to you about the Connesson concerto.
This is a second concerto that he's written for me called Danses, concertantes.
Exciting.
So the first concerto written for Mathieu Dufour in Chicago is for a big orchestra and two harps and lots of strings and massive piece. And this is sort of almost the opposite. So I asked him to write for a smaller orchestra, or it's like a Mozart orchestra plus percussion. And it's, Danses, concertantes, 7 short movements. 4 very fast movements and in between there's a beautiful sort of cantilena aria, the second movement, and then 2 variations on that movement, so it goes fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast. And the first variation on the, let's call it the aria, is a tango macabre.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
He described it as being something like Ravel's La Valse for zombies. So it's got this kind of, it's dancing, but it's got this kind of very dark. Sinister side. And then in contrast, the third movement just before it, for example, is beautifully light scherzo in 6/8. And so it's wonderful music. I'm a big fan of his music, and I'm thrilled to bits that he wrote this concerto for me.
What are you?
Well, also it's really a great addition to the flute repertoire.
That's
Absolutely, it's very French. It couldn't be anything else other than French music. And what I mean is you can smell really the history of Ravel, Debussy. The orchestration is wonderful. It's very transparent. It's very virtuoso. Some beautiful tunes, but a lot of articulated virtuoso. And it's all dancing, so it's very rhythmic. And he's very inspired by, in addition to his cultural heritage, the composers that went before him, he also is very inspired by jazz and lighter music. Even some places he says, "Can you hear this is rock and roll?" And so sort of, if you imagine that Ravel was still composing now and sometimes went to jazz concert and a rock concert, then you put all this together, and this is kind of the language of Connesson.
Wow. He seems to be a super inspired person.
Absolutely.
How was it actually to collaborate with him? How was the process?
Wonderful. We've met 3 times. The first time was shortly after he agreed to write the piece, and I was in Paris with my orchestra, and I said, "Would you have time to just meet for a coffee?" And so it was literally hello. And my French is really, really, really poor, and his English is, let's say, not fluent, so we were using a lot of hands to explain, but very, very kind, sort of witty guy, and I think you hear that in the music as well. And then last July I went to his home outside Paris, and he had some sketches. We'd arranged the appointment, a couple of months before, and so he didn't know at that stage how much he would have for me to look at. But we played some of the slow movements that he was sitting at the piano playing, and I was looking over his shoulder, reading the manuscript from the piano music stand, and then he played me on the computer some of the sketches that he had for the fast movements. And when I went to that meeting, I thought, well, I don't know whether you know of his solo flute piece, Captara, that he wrote for the Larieux competition last year. I thought, well, it's useful to maybe work on that so I can present him what I understand he means by an accent, and he can explain to me what he means by an accent and where that differs, so that just to kind of align our understanding of one another's language, if you like, musical language. So that was very interesting. And then then he sent me the flute concerto, the second concerto. I got the score in November, and I went to see him at the end of January, and then I played everything for him, and we talked a lot about how he wanted the phrases to be shaped and how much swing, and we had a lot of discussion about the tempi, because the tempi are very fast. And I said, yeah, but it's a big hall we're playing in, so it's a big orchestra, and so maybe what sounds great nearby on a computer, once it's in such a big space, will it work? No, it really has to be this tempo. So he was he has a very strong idea of what he wants, and it was very interesting to talk about his inspiration for, like, the Laval's zombie story. That's such a vivid image.
Of course, and then it helps you also to get that picture in your mind.
Absolutely.
And will he be there at the premiere and be there with the rehearsals also?
Yes, he's coming to New Zealand. And,
wow.
So he'll be there for the whole process out there. We don't have very many rehearsals, but so it's very, very exciting. Yeah.
Super. And we wanted to ask you also, is there a difference for you performing already existing repertoire versus newly written repertoire? Is the excitement different?
Yes, it is different. And why is that different? What I felt very strongly this time is I have to make sure that it sort of works for future generations as well. So I feel the kind of the responsibility, not just that can I make it work for these performances, but I really hope that his music will become part of our literature in generations to come. And so I felt very much
pressure to.
Well, yes, the sort of the responsibility that making sure that the way that I perform it is such that when people, I guess it's being recorded for the radio, that when people can listen back to it, they'll think, oh, so she worked with a composer, so maybe that's what he wanted, or I felt it quite strongly this time. It's not the first time that I've had a concerto written for me, but somehow this feels very. I feel the burden of responsibility as well as the honor and the thrill of having a piece written for me.
But future research analysis of the piece, and the original recording. We understand.
But that's actually super beautiful that you mentioned this, that you feel this kind of responsibility towards the future generation, because we also, when we were preparing the questions, we somehow thought, wow, because you published a book that is basically for free, or people can pay what they want, which is super accessible as well. And you have your YouTube video tutorials, which are also super accessible. So it's nice to see that, you seem to feel this responsibility of the future generations, and that's very beautiful.
And we thought also, is it one of your kind of goals that education is accessible, and that you're trying to make your material accessible to as many musicians as...
Absolutely. That's very much my mission. I've been fortunate enough to have some wonderful teachers, and the world all those years ago was such that my parents didn't have to pay for a lot of my education. So I received a lot of fantastic education for nothing or for very little. And I think the world is changing in such a way that, you know, education now is very expensive for most people, and I think knowledge shouldn't be only accessible to people with a healthy bank account, you know. I think that knowledge is something that we should share, and
it's also giving an opportunity to some voices being heard that maybe normally wouldn't have that. Yeah,
absolutely.
But we're very grateful for the exercises, and also your videos on YouTube that you started in 2020.
Yes.
That, I think we've all seen them.
Yes.
And
I think
Oh my
most
goodness.
flutists.
Well, this was a very, you know, when COVID struck and we had the prospect of weeks stuck at home with nothing to do. I just bought an iPad, and so I thought, okay, well, one option is to make sure that I scan all my music and put it on the iPad, but how boring is that? And then I thought, actually, if I did something like sort of making to-camera tutorials, that can be there also after COVID, and it was something that kept. I mean, the initial title was the LIP tutorials, the Lockdown Insanity Prevention. So initially, it was a kind of selfish preserving my sanity during a very, I think we could call it a traumatic time for everyone, in different ways. So it was initially it was my motivation to get out of bed in the morning and to do something.
And to have some kind of structure and goals.
And I'd never recorded myself. I only just bought the iPad like the month before lockdown. And I'd never used iMovie or edited anything ever. So a lot of it is very clunkily edited, and but it's all done from the heart, and I just felt so sad as I saw my concerts were cancelled, but also my masterclasses were cancelled. I saw auditions being cancelled. I saw competitions being cancelled, and I just felt so sad for that whole generation who are on the cusp of just going to conservatoire or just graduated from conservatoire, and then there's nothing. And so I thought, well, what can I do? I'm one person, and of course I was sad for my own concerts which were cancelled and my masterclasses which are cancelled because I love what I do. Yes. But I got my salary every month. Thank you very much. I could have stayed in bed for 10 weeks and no one would know. But I felt so bad for you guys, the people that.
And in those videos, I think this sincerity comes across, and it's so well organized. And we were wondering, did you also for the book with the exercises, and how do you protect?
Yeah, because for people that don't know, there's a book that can be downloaded online, and it's Get Back in Shape After a Break, which is great. So check it out.
Yeah, so we were wondering, how did you gather the exercises? Did you have a book where you kind of dotted down everything that came up on your mind? Or
you mean for the YouTube videos or for the book?
Yeah,
or
both,
the book
actually, because I mean it's kind of really well organized. And just how did you come up with all the material?
Well, thank you. I'm glad you find them well organized. I tried to be well organized, and my goal was to get every YouTube video down to 10 minutes. I failed miserably with many of them. It was my pleasure to explore a topic, whatever topic I chose. I started by choosing the topics which came up the most when I was teaching masterclasses, and so I had my ideas of how I would help someone if they came to me in a masterclass and the exercises that I would work on. But I also took the opportunity to learn, and I was reading other flute players' books on various topics and tried to. So I wrote pages and pages of notes. What do I want to cover? What are the most important exercises? So I think it was Mozart. I think that was the first one that I thought, this is just going to be too long. So I had to split it into two two halves, and one was a sort of general points, and then one was a kind of bar by bar, going to, in this bar take care of that, and in this bar what I listen for is this. Of course, it's all very personal. It took me days and days to try and whittle it down and to get to the few points which I felt were so essential. Of course, you can make a half an hour video, but if you spend 8 minutes talking about each point, then people will stop listening. So it was my aim to be as focused as possible with the videos. With the book, which you can get now on my website, and you can, as you say, you can download it for free, or if you want to give a donation, that's also very welcome. But I want it to be there for anyone. And I broke my wrist last June, and I had my wrist in a cast, and then I wanted to make sure that I could get back to playing as soon as possible. And so, with advice from the physiotherapist saying, absolutely maximum 5 minutes, and then stop until you have absolutely no pain, and then then you can play another 5 minutes. And so the first day it took me, I think, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening to do 1 hour's practice.
Wow.
just having the discipline to do very small chunks. And when you're only playing for 5 minutes, you have to become very focused. What am I going to do in those 5 minutes? So the book is based on basically a lot of my favorite foundation exercises that I do to a greater or lesser degree every day that I practice. And it was an interesting exercise as I got back into playing to it helped me to focus my practice. So again, it was sort of something which in the short term was helping me to think about, okay, now my next 5 minutes I want to focus on whatever it was, articulation or something, and then, okay, so which exercises are most helpful to do in my 5 minutes when I can practice on this? So it was good for focusing my mind, the injury, and then I thought of the title, and after a break, a summer break or winter break, and then getting back into shape. So yeah.
I was actually wondering, when you take a break, for example in the summer, what are the most noticeable things when you come back? Where do you have to focus the most on, or where do you feel it the most after a break?
The air, breathing.
Yeah.
Breathing, blowing. The fingers come back very quickly. And even when I broke my wrist, I could keep my fingers moving. And so I would sort of mentally practice scales. So my fingers come back quite quickly. But air, so sound, I would say first is the first thing that's noticeable, but that comes because your air, the use of air is got a bit lazy.
Yeah, because our body just got tired or too relaxed.
The capacity got smaller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So another thing that is kind of part of this education part, you created the Netherlands Flute Academy.
Yes.
And you're also giving a lot of masterclasses throughout the continent. And we were wondering, is teaching in a conservatory something you would imagine doing?
It's something I did do for quite a long time. I was teaching at the Royal Conservatory in The Hague for 11 years. And I did 2 years at the same time doing orchestral class in the Conservatoire of Amsterdam. And I found it very difficult to combine with the orchestra. And I felt, at some point, I resigned actually 3 times from the Conservatory in The Hague. And the first time I was persuaded back quite easily because I love teaching. It's, that teaching is something that I'm very passionate about. I come from a family of teachers, and there's nothing more exciting in my musical life actually than when in a lesson, it can happen in a master class, that someone just gets what you're saying, and that's the biggest thrill for me. So I love teaching. So the first time I was persuaded back quite easily. The second time I resigned, I said, but I want to be there for my students. And I can't be there for my students because I'm away on tour or I'm playing concerto somewhere or whatever. And I feel it's really important that, especially in the bachelor phase, that students have the opportunity to have a lesson every week. And I couldn't offer that. So I felt, I was doing them and the school a disservice by teaching. And then they said, yeah, but what about if you have an assistant? So I think the last 4, maybe even 5 years, when I was in The Hague, I had a teaching assistant. So the students had a lesson every week. But then I still sort of thought, well, I miss my students, It's I think about them all the time, even if I don't see them for a month. Well, how is so and so's articulating? How is so and so's? Maybe they had a particular problem or learning a particular piece for something, and I just found it too difficult to try and balance these two parts of my life. And so I finally, the third time, I really, that stuck when I resigned that time. And by that stage, I'd brought my class back down to a very small number, and actually they were graduating. I think all of them graduated that year, or maybe 1 or 2, had 1 or 2 years to go, I can't remember. But it felt like that I'd done what I could try and do
like the cycle
with combining. I started with 5 students in The Hague, and I went up to at some point 12 or even 14 at some point. Not all that I was responsible for all of them, because I had Jeroen Brom as my assistant, and some of them had 3 out of 4 of their lessons with him, and then once a month a masterclass with me, and some students we had 50-50, but 12 or 14, to have the responsibility as a teacher for 12 or 14 students just felt too overwhelming. So I brought that back down in the end. I think I had 3 when I finally resigned, and now I'm visiting professor in the academy in London. So that offers me some sense of continuity. I see almost the whole department at least once a year. Some people I see twice, and so then you can watch someone develop, which is so beautiful, through the 4 years of bachelor and 2 years of masters, which is great. So that gives me some sense of continuity, and otherwise it's just master classes, which it's lovely because you can give 200%. And then what the student does with that information is their responsibility. So I can walk away and say, okay, I did really everything I can do in that 45 minutes or hour, whatever.
And you can really
help
spread inspiration also.
Yes, I hope so. And so that's the way it has something unsatisfactory, because you never know what they are going to do with that information. So there's a part of it which...
Do you wish you could have still this kind of following?
Of course, but there are still only 24 hours in the day, and still only 7 days in a week. So,
and I think it's very responsible actually to say, I cannot be there for my students, because a lot of professors actually have too many things to do, but they still teach, and then the students are a bit left alone or something.
Everyone deals with it in a different way, and it's just really kind of. Yeah, how do you want to? It's a personal approach.
It's very personal, and I'm not saying that that professors are wrong to do that, not at all. But it was something for me that it was weighing on my mind, that I can't be there. What actually the conclusion I came to was I can't be the teacher I want to be.
Yeah.
And so then, okay, so what can I do? Well, I can. When I have some time, then I can give a masterclass here or there. And sometimes a school will invite me for 2 or 3 days, or sometimes I'll do a week's course somewhere, or sometimes it's just an afternoon or a day or something. And that I can do, and then I can give all give everything for that period of time. And then you just hope that people understood what I meant. And
do you still keep in touch with your students from The Hague?
Some of them, yes. Some of them are colleagues. And actually, the Netherlands Flute Academy, Jeroen Bron, he was one of my first students when I came to the Netherlands, and then he was my assistant for a few years, and now he's a main study teacher in The Hague. So. Yeah, some students have become colleagues.
Oh, that's
in
beautiful.
Orchestras, and yeah.
We got also an audience question, and they were wondering what were your earliest influences to take up a musical career.
And they also mentioned that your father was their favorite math teacher. Her name is Kate, and she mentioned that she was in the class with Kathy.
Oh, my sister.
Yes.
How lovely is that?
It's really funny.
Kate, what was her family name?
We can check.
Oh, you can tell me
check
after.
it later. Yeah.
How lovely. Well, actually, mentioning my dad, he played the flute. I don't think he ever had a lesson, but he's very musical, and he is one of these sickening people. He can pick up the flute. Maybe he didn't play for months or a year, and he picks up the flute and it sounds gorgeous. So as you know, that's and very musical ear, and so he kind of figured out the fingerings for himself, and then, but so this was when he was at school and at university, and this sort of age he was playing the flute, but then of course he got a job and family started, and the flute got kind of left behind. And I found his flute one day, and because we'd had recorder lessons at school, I could kind of work out what was going on the flute. So that was how I started. But there was always music in the house. My mum played the piano very well as an amateur, but so when I started the flute, she would accompany me, and my grandmother had played the violin. On the other side, my grandfather had played the organ and was a choir master in church. And so there was always kind of music around. My aunt enjoyed singing a lot. So there was music around. And
that sounds like a really nice ensemble. The combination of all the instruments.
Yeah. And my sister is a harpist, and she, like me, is a professional. But I don't think either of us ever started out thinking, "Oh, this is going to make a great job one day." We just started, and because we loved playing an instrument, and we used to play a lot together. So that's fun, because of course you have to, as a young. When you're at school and you have to do your schoolwork, and I was studying 3 instruments, my sister was studying 3 instruments. So some things you have to miss out on, a birthday party here or a school trip there or whatever. But somehow, because we were both doing that, it never felt like you were the only person missing out. So that made it all a lot more bearable. So even though neither of our parents is professional musician, we both went into the profession, which is quite unusual. And my dad was a maths teacher and my mum was a drama teacher. So I think both sort of feed in different ways into music somehow. Mm-hmm. And they both still love music, and they come to as many concerts as they can get to. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's very beautiful.
And speaking of drama, actually the whole the Connesson, like him going that you will meet in New Zealand and make this whole production, it's kind of like a theater play.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
So it's a full circle again.
Yeah.
But speaking of kind of your path and all of the projects that you're doing, we wanted to talk to you about Project Paloma. And the 4th edition just came out.
That's right.
In the past year.
France, yes.
And the 5th edition
We'll record part 5. So maybe I should just give a little bit of context. Yeah. What is Project Paloma? For years, I noticed that there were so many of our really core repertoire pieces that were written during or around the Second World War. And I thought that's really weird because it doesn't coincide with the rise of a great flute superstar, and it doesn't coincide with the great development of the instrument. So my theory became that the flute, which is this instrument of innocence and peace and simplicity, that maybe composers during those very dark years were looking for this musical voice of the representation of simplicity, of purity, of peace. And so maybe the flute is like the dove that after the flood that Noah sent from the ark to look for. So this was my sort of slightly romantic explanation for why there was this surge in our great repertoire. Prokofiev Sonata, Frank Martin Ballade, Martineau Sonata, just to name a few. There's so much repertoire. Duthier Sonatine. So many of my favorite pieces were written in such a dark time. So for years, decades, I'd had this dream. One day I want to present some music from that time with poems or texts about that period. And when I became a member of Splendor, where we are today, in Amsterdam, this collective of 50 musicians, and we have the opportunity to program what we feel is important to us, what we want to share. We can do tryouts, we can do concerts. There's no curated theme of the season or anything. And I thought, oh, great. Now I have the opportunity, a stage where I can put this concert on. So I sat down with my pen and paper and I thought, okay, which pieces absolutely have to be in this concert? And I realized that I had enough material for a whole weekend of concerts. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be too overwhelming. So I decided to split it into 5 language areas, let's say. So the first, Paloma 1, including Frank Martin Ballade and Hindemith Sonata, for example, Frühling Fantasy. They're all written just before, sort of on the cusp, when there was unrest in Europe. So someone like Karl Frühling, his music, he denied his roots. He came from Lviv in Ukraine, and he denied that he came from there because that would have been a mark of his Jewishness, which he was living in Vienna, and then his music would not be performed, or and it would be neglected. And indeed, his music this score was found in the library marked "Do not play," forbidden music. So that was the Paloma 1, is music from Germany, Austria, and Frank Martin as well, written on the cusp of the Second World War. Second was Prokofiev Sonata, together with Weinberg miniatures, 12 miniatures, both of them born outside Russia, but both died as Russians in Russia. Unfortunately, we recorded that in the very week where Russia invaded Ukraine. So that was rather unfortunate, but 2 very wonderful pieces, very colourful, characterful. And I think that there's some seeds of hope that something out of the horrors of that time, something beautiful, can be created. And that's the power of mankind, that's possible, even possible. Then the third disc was all based around the Netherlands, so including works by Vlothuis and Leo Schmidt and Dick Kattenburg, even music written in the camps. When Vlothuis was in the camp, he was writing his Obade. Number 4, in a way, was the easiest to program because, the Paris Conservatoire commissioning these works every year. Fantastic, what a wonderful resource. So but in the technical sense, of course, such challenging pieces so
Very
it was
much.
very difficult from a flute technical point of view. But Duthieu, Chandelinos, Sancan, Sonatine, and Agrestide from Bozza. So for quite challenging pieces. And then my wonderful pianist Andrew West also is in all of these albums, is playing some solo piano pieces to give a sort of broader musical taste, flavor to the album. And this summer we're recording the fifth one, which is UK and US, with slightly cheating the Martinu Sonata, because it was written when he was in the United States. So that's a little bit of a cheat, but I felt it fits better there than putting it together. Somehow it
Context.
worked.
Yeah,
Yes,
he
yeah.
was writing it there.
Yeah,
He was influenced.
yeah.
And do you see parallels in writing styles, or even in the groups, or just in general? How does the flute come about?
It's very interesting with some of the composers, like for example the Prokofiev Sonata. We think of that first bar which starts off sunny D major, like he really wants to write a cheerful piece, and already by the second bar it's doom and gloom, and you know, so he was sort of pulled down into the darkness. Someone like Dick Kattenberg, it almost sounds as if he's put his blinkers on. He doesn't want to see that there's a war. He doesn't want to hear there's a war, and creates a fantasy experience for the listener, perhaps of without a world. It creates a musical world without war, and I think that someone like Martinu, for example, that there is definitely the center part of the central movement with this massive piano solo there. That's this power and darkness is absolutely there, but at other times I feel as if he's using maybe the flute or the line to come out of this darkness and to be a voice of hope or something, or peace, that we can still hope for some peace in the future. So it's very interesting what happens to artists of all shapes and forms. Like, I mean, we can't compare, but what we went through recently with COVID, you see how that affected artists of all different fields in such different ways. And some people became hermits, and other people reached out, and that's just how different people respond to the trauma around them. And I think the war, you see the same.
Project Paloma is a great anthology of this collective compositions around the world.
Yeah, and when we perform them in concert, we perform them with texts from that language area, and in a very similar way, poets and writers, some of them write about the darkness, and others reach out for something, the peace, and striving for peace, and a more like an escape, maybe.
Yeah,
even
an imaginative world, for sure. Yes.
So it's very interesting, and it's quite moving for us as musicians, as I've had various different writers and poets and artists speaking and reciting in the concerts. They find it very interesting having the musical perspective, adding to the words, and we find it very moving having the words feeding into the music. And I think for the audience, it's quite a sort of 3D experience of an evening, I hope. And yeah, we shouldn't forget. And
that's very, very important. Yeah, I imagine it as a very strong and touching experience to go through that music, knowing what was happening around.
Absolutely.
But I'm just curious. So on the last CD will be Martinu, and
yes.
What other works?
Edwin York Bowen Sonata. Actually, it was written shortly after the war. It was completed in 1946. and the Eldin Burton Sonatine, Martinu Sonata, and I've forgotten now what Andrew is playing the solo pieces. I think Lennox Berkeley and pass. I owe you a composer's name.
That's fine.
Yeah. So we're recording that in July, and that will come out in January 26th.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We will note it in our agendas. Well, I think it's very nice to do some research around the pieces that we're playing, and you're also making editions.
Yes.
You mentioned Carl Fruling piece, and we saw that that's one of the editions that you've edited.
Yes.
And how does your research and editing process look like when you do that?
Well, I didn't do very much research for that. I can't take the credit. That was my friend cellist Stephen Islis, who he had found Carl Fruling's trio for clarinet, cello and piano. I'm not quite sure how he came in contact with that piece initially, but he loved the piece and went to Vienna to explore further were there other pieces in the library that he could play. And he found a manuscript it was actually a flute concerto originally, written in 1929. And he found a manuscript and he said, Emily, this is a composer that no one's ever heard of, and it's amazingly beautiful music. And here's a manuscript of the flute and piano reduction of the orchestral score. And it's quite clearly notated in the piano part which instruments from the orchestra play what. Fruling himself was a pianist, so maybe it was the score that he was going to orchestrate, or maybe it was a reduction of the full score. We don't know because the full score is lost. And I thought it was a wonderful piece. I performed it a few times in concert, and flute players at the concert said, this is such a lovely piece, never heard of it, where can I get the music? And so I contacted friends with the publishing company and said, this is a really terrific piece, and how about publishing it? And so that's how that came about. And then my task is to be as true as possible to the manuscript. I try not to offer too many breathing places or things like that, because I think that's so much to do with an individual and how you see the score. So my responsibility in that sense is more to the composer than to the player who's going to look at the edition. So I try not to interfere too much, to be as little present as possible, let's say.
Yeah.
I did an edition, an arrangement actually of the L'après-midi d'un faune for flute and piano, and in that I had a very clear mission, because there are lots of existing editions, and I was playing it actually in a concert in Portugal, and a friend of mine was in the audience and said, oh, that's interesting, lovely edition, which edition do you play? And I said, well, actually it's sort of, I steal a little bit from this edition and idea from that edition, I make my own part here. And he said, would you like to publish it? Next year is the Debussy year.
Perfect timing.
And so it was perfect timing, and so they're both available now on Scherzo editions in Portugal. And for my aim for playing it myself and when I'm teaching it is for the flute part to be as close as possible to the orchestral flute part. So I write in the score who is playing that. When it's not a flute part, which instrument should you try and sound like? So when you're trying to be a horn, or when you're trying to be a clarinet, or when you're trying to be an oboe, then you should, as a flute player, use those cues to exploit that colour or the other colour. And so that was my mission for that. That was quite different from the way I edited the Fruling. That was also the Fruling was the first time that was ever printed. So I felt that, the responsibility to make sure there weren't too many mistakes. Of course, there were too many mistakes, but there's since a second edition. So I think it depends on which piece. And then I have some educational books for when you can play along with a CD. And not everyone. I was lucky enough. I grew up having my mum played the piano and my sister played the harp, so I very often had the opportunity to play with other people. Not everyone has that at home. So the bel canto disc. There's each track you can hear me playing with harp, and then you can play along with just the harp part.
Nice.
And then there's a Köhler and Garibaldi etudes where I've had a second part. I didn't write it, the second flute part. So matching, so you can have a teacher and student playing the same etude with some little exercises before. So if you can, one A4 side is exercises. If you can play all these exercises, then you can play the study more easily. And then you have another A4 page of just the flute part, and then 2 A4 pages next to each other with 2 flute parts. So the teacher can play along with the student.
Which makes it so much more fun for the student.
Exactly. Well, if music's not for fun, what is it for? I think if we don't have pleasure, then we cannot give pleasure.
Which it kind of perfectly seeps through this question. As a principal flutist of Concertgebouworkest, you're already very busy, and with all of these projects and writing editions, I believe it takes time. But what inspires and motivates you to keep creating these projects? And in between moments, what do you like? Where do you get the inspirations?
Oh gosh. They say, I don't know whether you've heard this quote, that if you find a job you love, you'll never work another day in your life. And I'm so fortunate that that's how I feel most of the time. I'm so lucky doing what I'm doing with the musicians that I come into contact with in the orchestra or outside with the students, whether it's at the academy or master classes or a situation like this. I think if you're open to receiving, inspiration from everyone and everything around you, you don't have to look very far. Inspiration is there. I mean, this collective here of 50 musicians, from pop musicians to ancient music specialists and everything in between. And they're all so inspiring. My colleagues from the orchestra, so inspiring. Conductors, soloists we work with. And it's, the world is full of inspiration. Even the birds, are inspiration. And going to a museum is inspiring. So it's keeping your eyes and ears open to the world, and then let the world fill you, because there's inspiration there all around, all the time. Wow. Even if it's a sort of almost a negative, that it forces you to think 180 degrees opposite of something. So there is so much inspiration in the world.
That's a beautiful quote to come to an end. But before we let you go, we have some fire questions. We always have fire questions. Oh. It's about being fast.
Okay.
The first question is, what is your favorite place in Amsterdam?
Oh, is it cheating to say my home?
No, that's perfect. Well, that's beautiful.
How does your perfect Sunday look?
My perfect Sunday? Well, we often have a concert on a Sunday afternoon. We have a series on Sunday afternoon. And I still, after nearly 30 years, this June will be 30 years that I've been in the orchestra, I still find it very difficult to know whether to have breakfast or lunch or brunch on Sunday, because I can't eat a lot before I play a concert, but I have to eat something. So it's a day when I managed to succeed. There is a first time for everything, in eating the right amount at exactly the right time. So I get to the end of the concert without being hungry.
And what is the soundtrack that you would choose for your life?
I'm going to cheat again, and I'm going to say nature sounds. Like
That's the first one that we
Yeah.
have on this podcast. Yes.
I would, if I could take one CD, then it would be a sound with one track about ocean sounds and another the forest, and
Perfect.
like a lake in the
Beautiful.
evening or something. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us and for taking time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. What a great initiative Flute Space is. I wish you every success with it.
Thank you.